This is the fourth and final video in our series on referencing with Hull Harvard and APA 7th. It concentrates on how to use the sources effectively in your writing rather than the specifics of the systems. Most of the time, when we refer to the works of others, we quote, paraphrase or summarise their writing. Quoting is when we're using the exact words of others. It should only really be used in very specific circumstances and definitely not overused. Paraphrasing is about rewriting a short paragraph or sentence into your own words. The writing is similar in length to the original. Summarising is briefly capturing the main point from a number of paragraphs, a whole article or book chapter. The writing is significantly shorter than the original. I'm going to start off by looking at quoting and the circumstances when it would be a good idea to use this method. So a good use of a direct quote would be if you're providing a definition of something. Definitions can be very specific, so it's usually best to use the exact words from your source so that you don't accidentally change the meaning in some way. Another good time to use a direct quote would be when the authors have expressed themselves in an unusual or notable way. Sometimes you'd lose some of the impact of a phrase if you paraphrase it. Look at the second example here. It would not be as powerful to say students had had bad experiences with the printed word as saying they had been burned by print. Note one interesting point about this example. Because the actual quote was quite a few words away from the citation, the page number is given separately after the quote instead. Sometimes you are quoting from a document that is well known or historically important, and changing the words does not seem appropriate. Giving a direct quote works better instead. Occasionally, you want to refer to just a single word used in an unusual way, or a very short, perhaps two-word phrase that it would be impossible to change, so a direct quote should be used. In the example here, Syed's entire book was called Orientalism, so a page number is not needed. You also wouldn't need a page number if the original source was a web page or another source without page numbers. Another good time to use a direct quote is when a quotation rather than a paraphrase makes your point more justifiable because it backs it up very specifically. This is a harder one to explain and not as clear-cut as some of the others, but sometimes what an author is saying specifically backs up the point you're making, and you may feel like putting it into your own words will make it less helpful in justifying your point. In the example here, the point is that something that was supposed to have been agreed by the university community was actually just a small development group. And the quote by Newstub makes it really clear that it's been recognised that this was a limited sample. Paraphrasing it could lose that clarity. As I say, this is often a judgment call, so always ask yourself whether paraphrasing it could actually show more understanding. Finally, sometimes there really isn't another way of rewording something, especially if it's just a list of things like this. Paraphrasing it could become so convoluted and probably lose some of the conciseness which academic writing also needs. As I alluded to with one of the examples, usually paraphrasing or summarising is better than quoting, as putting something into your own words shows you've really understood what you've read. It also makes your voice, your argument clearer. Instead of just writing author A says this, author B says that, you can craft it into your own arguments and just indicate where your justification came from. This also makes it easier to read the text, as it isn't constantly jumping from one writer's style to another, giving it more flow. So let's look at paraphrasing in a little more detail. When you paraphrase, you must do more than change a few words or phrases for their synonyms. If you look at this example here, it's clear that somebody has just right-clicked on a few words and chosen an alternative form. The actual structure of the writing stays the same. This is plagiarism. You're implying you've written it, but it's too close to the original for that. Even giving the citation at the end of the text does not make up for that. To paraphrase it successfully, Yes, you will still use some synonyms, but you'd also change the structure too. See how this paraphrase starts with what was at the end of the original and ends with what was at the beginning. It's switched around. This is much more successful. So here are some top paraphrasing tips. Yes, use some synonyms. Also, use alternative word forms. For example, switching from uniqueness to unique, experiencing to experiences, democratic to democracy. When you do that, it will actually force you to change the structure, which is the third one. So changing the structure or order of the writing will always improve it. Also, try to do it first without the text in front of you. So close the book, switch to another window, something like that. After you've paraphrased it, go back and just check that it isn't still too similar to the original, and maybe change it using some of these techniques shown here. And finally, let's look at summarising in a bit more detail. When you are summarising, you're looking at the bigger piece of text and finding useful parts. Imagine it as mining for golden nuggets, and then just putting those together into your own words using the skills we've already covered for paraphrasing. So the summarising process involves usually reading through the text, highlighting or underlining or pulling out anything that you find interesting. Try not to do that for everything. Then you choose 2 or 3 points from what you've pulled out that you think could work together to justify the point you're making, and write those out on a separate piece of paper or in a separate document. Then paraphrase that separate part into your own words. We hope these videos were useful, and please feel free to contact the skills team if you have any other queries about referencing.